Next year, next gardening season, I want you to take your garden to another level. And we got to try something new this year. And I want everybody to pick what they're going to try new. And I'm going to kind of go through a couple things, really one major thing, but it's taking the knowledge that I got this year from the way my garden acted and then expanding on that and hopefully try something different. So this year we did 2 beds of corn. We did our popcorn here, which looked great. And then we did our eaten corn in the bed over there that did not look great and did not do great. Popcorn looked great, got nice and big, and but it didn't quite produce, okay? It did produce, but just not really what we wanted. So we're gonna take that knowledge and understand what we did and then apply something new to it. I actually have no clue if it's gonna work. But then we're gonna do that, and then we're also gonna do something with our tomatoes for next year. I had tomatoes in this bed here, back here, and then actually in the wild garden, and the wild garden collapsed. We know that, we've gone over it, we've beaten that horse dead. But when they came over here, we had spacing issues. You know, one of the reasons that there was an issue is because there's a trellis here, so it took up a little bit of the bed. But we want to expand upon what we did here too. It was the first year that we basically monocropped tomatoes. Seemed like a sexy idea, but it wasn't the best idea that I've ever had. You know, it shaded out the green beans, and then they just started getting all clumped, and it was really hard to get in there and manage. And I started doing my garden plan last night, very preliminary. Maybe I'll try and put a snapshot of my rough garden plan on my on a post here coming up in a couple days or something like that. But we're trying to do that, and it's just kind of, I don't know. It's a difficult process. We're going to talk about both of those changes that I'm going to make, and why is that important? I think as gardeners on the Backyard Gardens podcast, it's the saying that we have, and we learn to grow and we grow for change, right? But when we learn to grow, let's take stuff and try and apply methods to our garden, tweak them to work for us in certain ways. And I think that's a really important tool to have in your personal toolbox, where we're not just copying what we see from other people, but paying attention to what your garden's producing and then making that adjustment as you see fit for your garden. By the way, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Sandy Bottom Homestead. I am in coastal North Carolina. I'm not going to say my zone because it doesn't matter, but I'm in coastal North Carolina, and that will set the stage for this to an extent. It doesn't really matter for this video, but a lot of people want to know. Reading yesterday, and I saw a corn farmer who is testing something different. And what he was testing was his spacing between his rows. On the subject of rows, I do rows, but then I don't really have a lot of spacing in between them, as you can clearly see. I mean, there's 4 rows of Brussels sprouts, and it just looks like a mass planting, which it is. But even here, you can see in this bed that we have 3 rows of cabbages, and they're not really, the rows aren't spaced. And so what I'm referring to is when you see, like, you read the back of the plant and it's like, or the seed packets, or you read online and it's, you know, plant beans, you know, 50 plants for 8 feet or something. You know, I'm just using random numbers. And then 2 feet in between rows. Well, when you do a raised bed, you don't really have that luxury. But this really caught my attention. So what he did is he had 60-inch rows in between his corn, which apparently, and I don't really know how far, if you're a farmer, feel free to comment what that average, most common spacing is for corn. It would be nice. But he was saying that he did that, and then what he did, now there's multiple parts to it, but what he did in between the rows, just imagine this is corn again, and here's our in between the row. When the corn got to stage, I think it was 5 or 6, one of the two, what he did was he came back in and he put a cover crop in the row. So when the corn was harvested, the cover crop would be cut, because, you know, they don't do like we do. They cut the whole thing. So it's kind of working the soil and benefiting it and everything else. But what he said was important. Talked about the yield. And he did it, and he said there wasn't a huge increase in yield. But what there was very similar yield in the harvest. So what does that mean for us? Well, you know, having something growing in the ground is important, because what we're starting to find out is, you know, the photosynthesis that the plants do actually, not all, but most plants will leach part of the nutrients back into the soil through the roots. So there's a term for it, I can't remember it off the top of my head. It's like react something or other, I don't know. I'll try and get that, and we'll do something else about that maybe. We'll talk about it in a live, hopefully, or on the Backyard Gardens podcast. But so when we do that, and the way I'm looking at it is, I can go ahead and grow my corn, have a cover crop in place, and then when the corn's harvested, that cover crop will already be taking over, cut my corn out, and then replant if I want to do another cover crop or something around it, and then you're kind of always having that benefit. And the other aspect of it was, the sun is all the way up here, and it's coming down. The issue is, and this was, I don't know, for some reason it really finally clicked, was the sun was able to come down and hit in between the rows better. Now, this is really important, because this is what I notice in my garden. What I notice in my corn bed is the outsides would produce, but the middle didn't really do great. So it was like I was growing, I mean, for the video purposes, of course it looked great, but you know what? I don't really care about that. It just wasn't really producing what I wanted. So I'm thinking that if I put, and let's just keep it simple and put a row on this side and a row on this side, and then leave it empty, then all of that will get in there. And not to mention, I can pack it a little bit more dense then, because there won't be anything blocking it. So this is something I want to try next year. The other aspect of it is, one, before you comment and start raising hell with me, I know that corn doesn't do great in raised beds, but people have been doing it for a long time, and we were able to get a little bit of a harvest. The reason why we really didn't, and let's just say on the outside rows, we didn't fertilize with our liquid fertilizer, because we had that raccoon coming around. So we wanted to stop that issue, and that fish fertilizer was just a magnet for him. But now we've kind of switched, so we're ready to go at it again, and a little bit different. So part two about this is a couple different ways. One, once we move those beds up here, then you're gonna have, it'll be easier, because we'll have a lot of space that we can actually look at and decide what we want to do. And it'll be easier to track mentally for me. But for right now, like, we put our corn, or not our corn, our tomatoes in that bed, and then we put tomatoes in that bed. And what I'm thinking about doing is, one, I'm not gonna monocrop them anymore. Other thing is, by not having the beds, the tomato beds spread out. So what do I mean by that? I mean a tomato bed here and a tomato bed up there, or a tomato bed here and here. Like, this is almost a little bit better, but if we just take it and say, I'm gonna put tomatoes, and we're not monocropping, so remember that, and then we put tomatoes in this bed, then as we walk down the row, we'll be able to track our tomatoes better and see exactly when they're harvested, what we've harvested, what needs to be treated, instead of going back and forth and jumping around and stuff like that. Because invariably what happens is, and anybody with a big garden can tell you this, is what happens is things get lost in the mix, right? We'll treat over here, but we won't treat over here. We'll forget something, or we'll fertilize this one and not that one. But we need to treat them pretty similar, because they're the same plant. In the coming weeks, what we'll do is, as I hammer out my plan a little bit better, I'm gonna start talking about, and this is in the planning series. I don't know if this episode really goes into it or not. I don't think it does. But what we'll do is I'll start talking about different combinations that I'm planting together. I still like to monocrop, but what I learned this year is there are a lot of things that don't play well together. And when I say play well, I mean space-wise. You need more space. So As I laid all this out on the Planter app, which is the app that I use in order to plan my garden, there's a link below that'll get you a discount on it, so check that out for sure. It just kind of popped to me. I was visually able to see how it was going to go down. One thing that I'm kind of stuck on right now is once I get the beds up here is where to put the tomatoes, because peppers are nightshades, potatoes are nightshades, tomatoes are nightshades, and I want to be good in my rotation. So I'm trying to track where that goes. So I need to get everything moved up front before I can actually finalize it. But I think I'm kind of honing it in. This is part of it. So I spent the whole summer watching my garden, analyzing it, growing it, and then witnessing what was going on. And then you take that knowledge that you get and you say, well, what worked? Like clearly the Seminole pumpkin worked. Clearly the squash bed, the monocrop squash bed, worked perfectly in this bed. And I know I'm going to keep that combination. But what didn't work was my corn harvest wasn't great. My tomatoes were just difficult to work with. And then also with the sun and also monocropping, the peppers didn't work great either. So we're going to take all of that and mix it together, and we're going to come up with a solid plan for next year. And so we're going to do monocropping, but we're also going to do, I don't want to say companion planting because they may or may not be companions. We don't really do a whole lot of that, but familial plantings is more what we'll end up doing. And we'll talk about that also. But these are all things that we're working on and building in our gardens, and that's going to improve over time because we have data from this year. You have data for your garden, so take that data and make a change. Once I read that about that farmer, it just kind of clicked with me, and it's like, I'm not going to do a 60-inch row. I mean, my bed's not even 60 inches, but I can still do more than what I did last year and try to improve it. And that's where I'm sticking with it, because if I look at it this way, if that corn bed, if I put in 2 rows and they're double rows, they're 8-foot rows, and I put in, I think it's about 28 plants per, no, 16 plants per, that's 32 plants per row or for the bed. But there's that split in the middle. I have a feeling that I will get more harvest than if I put 60 plants in there, but only got ears that big.
Goodbye.